So we know that negotiation is a dance. Some people don't like the dance. We know that it takes the average in our database, and we've got about 20,000 cases now, from great mediators to folks at home with the app with a glass of wine at 11 o'clock at night. But we know that it's a dance. Number of moves can move from 3 to 54. Somebody went through 54, not moves, but rounds to get to 1. The average is a little over 7 in civil litigation. Even the car dealers know that nobody wants a deal in the first round. Car dealers play this game. They would love for us to buy fleet plans. Go to Costco, get one number. They know what their costs are, get out of Dodge. But instead, they've conditioned us, and we now condition them to want to play this rug bazaar thing every 5 or 10 years, where we go in and they put a sticker on a car. We come up with a price we got off the internet. They play this game of somebody goes and hides behind the Coke machine and says they're working real hard for us against the manager, comes back with a concession, a fairly large concession. Takes a while on that round, relatively speaking. Then you give them another number, still trying to lowball it. You might be walking for the door and they're running you down, whatever the dynamics are. But then what happens? Then there's a smaller concession at the end, and you might get things that don't mean anything to them, but might have some value to you, free oil change, undercoat, whatever it is, floor mats in the third round. And they do this not because they're getting better deals, they know what they're paying, but because they want all of us to go and tell our friends that old Fred, I took Fred on this Chevy. Fred's an easy mark, so that all my friends go down and buy their cars from Fred thinking that they can take advantage of him. So the whole thing is designed to make us feel good about the deal that we made, knowing that it might be bad. How is mediation any different? The last 2 hours are nothing more than constructing the hero story so that that person can feel good, even while their metabolism is crashing, that they made the right decision, and they can go defend it to spouses and bosses and friends at the bar that they made the right decision and come up with their hero story. So what do we hit in that period? Well, you'll see in a minute, we go big moves in the morning because they're still trying to justify them by an expert report. They're outrageous numbers, but they have some mathematical support. It's X times specials, whatever it is, pain and suffering, whatever it is, to inflate the numbers. But they're still trying to tether to something that might seem rational while making the demands. Then, you'll see in a minute, we close most of the gap, get into the middle muddle, and things are just a grind. You're just grinding it out. And that's the point in the day. This is one of my revelations. You'll see that I'm simply educated. Somebody's in a mediation. The guy, I think it was a plaintiff's side, getting bored with the process, decides that after lunch he's going to go to the gym and not tell the other side. Leaves me, and I go back in the room, nothing but a note on the table that says, Don, give him $50,000 every 20 minutes until I get back from the gym. I said, this is crazy. Did leave me a cell phone number in case things went off the rail, but a couple of ethical issues popping around. But then I thought, this is the first person who's ever listened to us when we say do a concession strategy and plan what your moves are going to be regardless of what happens on the other side. And I don't think those were the real numbers, but we played this out, and guess what happened by the time he got back from the gym? We were in the zipper, the zipper, where both sides are moving same increments. It wasn't 50,000 for 50,000, but it might have been 50,000 for 12.5 or 15. And so every time I come back with another 50, here comes another 12.5. So we're just going right down the zipper. He knew where the thing was going to be. He knew how long he was going to be at the gym, how many 50,000s I'd give away in the process. So he knew where his side of the equation was going to be, and he still had room to play and could blow it up. Well, it turns out that it triggered mirroring behavior. We didn't get into all this business because you know what happens in mediation. Most of the time they'll say, I know where I want to be, but what I'm really going to do is respond in round to every chicken something that the other side does. So if they give me a bad offer, I'm going to do one of these to them, and then we're off to the death spiral by the third round. So let's look at a couple. These are real cases that come along. You'll see dollars coming together, money coming together along the horizontal axis. time is up to down. I know it's the only time you'll ever see time plotted down, but it seems to make sense to have money coming together. Most of the time, as we all know, it'll be plaintiff starting first. Why? I could argue all day, but sometimes I'd say to the defendants, if you know more about the case than the other side, and you know anchors have some impact, even if the other side doesn't have informational symmetry, why don't you set the sticker price rather than the other side? But anyway, they don't do it. Everybody wants to wait because they think that somehow the clouds will part and the plaintiff will give them a number that they think will be reasonable. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm waiting. So what you'll see is the plaintiff starting somewhere up in here, because all this is normalized for time, and moving somewhere down here to get to a deal down, and these all come together. These aren't the bust. And the defendant coming in over here and doing something like this. They are rarely in the middle. You've heard all these rules, the midpoint between the first two reasonable offers. That's a great one. If somebody would only tell me when they start being reasonable, assuming they knew, that might provide some kind of a signpost to me that would know where the thing was going to end up. But it's kind of like saying that all the medical care spent in the last, dollars of medical care spent in the last year of life. Until we get a turkey baster that pops up and says you're in the last year, it's only something that helps after you die and know how much was spent in the last year, right? So the midpoint between the first two reasonable offers is something I have with amazing clarity the next day after I know where the end point was. Then I can say, oh, at 2:45, Joe started being reasonable. So watch the graphs. Obviously, there's a progression. They rarely end up at the 50-yard line. We all know that. There's more real estate off to the right. In the absence of a great counterclaim, the defendant's more or less bound by zero, and the game's on. We get into this large number, small number, whether you like the percentage moves or whether you like the dollar moves, right? Remember this one, the plaintiffs are always saying, well, gee, I moved $1.2 million, and the other side moved $50,000. And the $50,000 folks are going, yeah, but it was up from 10, so it's a 500% increase. And those guys started in fantasy land and came down 12%. So watch the graphs. You'll see the parties moving along. Notice the mirroring behavior, where they're almost exactly mirroring each other and to get to the end. You've got the opening part up here with the first three moves where people are sounding each other out, making moves that are tethered to the reports and things like that. Big gap. This one hit the skids in the middle muddle. Lot of talking. So what happens here? Plaintiff moves, defendant comes out of the box pretty strong. Plaintiff reciprocates, moves out a little bit. Defendant pulls back. So plaintiff and mediator probably, it wasn't my case, had a long conversation in here over a bad lunch, talking about, should we keep this up? You know, this is when they break out all those lines mediators love to hear. I hope you haven't ordered lunch yet. Or last week when we had a good mediator, they did X and so. And so after a long chat, plaintiff says, okay, I'm going to play it again. I'm going to move out to here. But we're going to see what the defendant does. Well, the defendant comes out again, and then we're a little bit back on. But notice the symmetry. This all sounds in the moment like it's just complete noise. Everybody's barking at us, and it sounds just like lots and lots of noise and static. But if you look at these graphs after the fact and the moves of the parties, it's really fairly elegant. There's a complete mirroring of behavior. Plaintiff moves in, defendant says, hey, we might be able to get a deal. And then we get the typical V. There will almost always be a V at the bottom, which is when the reasonable offers start. Then it is the midpoint at the end of the day on those progressions. And then the deal comes together. Every time, and that's the only theory that seems to hold water, is the old tit for tat. Remember that one? If people will respond to your tit with a tat, and then you'll get into this tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. Or on the concession strategies that if they don't respond in the same move, they will respond within two. And comes out a prisoner's dilemma that we can, do tit, tit, tat, and they will respond in the third move. But all of these graphs, most of the ones I see, are exactly tit for tat. People are responding not to end game, not to points that they want to get to, but in round to what did the other side do, and calibrating their moves in or back, depending on the behavior of the other side. That's why I always tell people when they start, they want to pull back all of a sudden on a fairly steady progression rate, and they want to slam on the brakes and ask us rhetorically, what do you think's going to happen? Well, we all know what's going to happen, and they know what's going to happen, or they wouldn't ask the question, right? They're going to reciprocate. They're going to throw on the brakes. If y'all keep this up for 2 rounds, we're going to get into a death spiral that ends up in impasse. And I'll tell you this, it's easier to avoid a death spiral by having that conversation in that round than it is to get into it and then try to get somebody, as you well know, to take that leap to get you back out of it. Here's an injury case, almost perfect symmetry. You can imagine all the noise that's going on with the offers, and we'll get a demo of that in a minute. But lots of noise, but completely elegant, almost linear lines through the progression. A little bit of pullback that's when the defendant keeps running a linear game, this is the equivalent of the 50,000 every 30 minutes, plaintiff reverts to the line and just keeps chugging. This is about the closest you'll get to where everybody's being reasonable, and it ends up pretty close. 37% of the original demand, but fairly close to the midpoint of the original offer and demand. But again, completely symmetrical even down to these pullbacks. Notice that when defendant pulls back here, it's reciprocated with a pullback there. And then defendant comes back out of it, almost reverts to the line, and then comes out. So the question is, if we can, you go to groups like this, and I could poll you guys, and the good mediators in here would tell me that most of the time, they will have a good idea within 5 or 10% by noon of what the ultimate outcome is going to be. Does that make anybody want to go out on a limb and say most of the time you'll have a very good sense of what's going to happen? Then we got to go through this kabuki theater for the rest of at least the middle muddle, so everybody can test out their assumptions, and with continual price information from the other side, narrow the gap. Because we know that, I think Jeremy probably gave you the neuroscience on it, we don't change our minds. We will reevaluate prior positions based on new information, but we do it in small increments. And that's the reason we can't do the 100 points on the board or 100 in 2 minutes on the clock and rush this thing from 3:30 to 5:30. People are mentally adjusting in small increments, doing anchor and adjust, anchor and adjust, anchor and adjust, all the way down to where they get down to here. And that's the reason we have to develop all these closing techniques, is because everybody's already got buyer's remorse by the time you get down to 3:30. If you make it through the middle muddle and it doesn't blow up, which my contention is that's the highest risk of impasse, is not during the morning, or even at the end. It's between the 11:30, 3:30 gap, where people are going to get intemperate and tired, hungry, everything else, and things are more likely to blow up there than over a red line at the end. So you're chugging along and get into that zone. Here's a construction case real quick. Usually you would think because of contract measure of damages it would be a little more symmetrical, but plaintiff takes an aggressive position. But notice what happens. You can bet the conversation on this thing went something like, you get away with that once. But guess what happens? There's all this research on anchoring, but how many of you think that the second round is more important than the anchoring round? It's more important what they move off of the anchor than it is the anchoring position that they took. Everybody will put up with this for at least one round. This is, now that we have mediators at least. In the era of a civil action in Boston, they blew the round. Remember, Jerry Fasher walks out with the pen and the croissant because the opening demand was too high. And I teach that one here, and all those lawyers will tell you that had there been a mediator there at the Four Seasons that day, the deal would have come together. So you can get away. Very few cases will blow over the initial anchors, even though we have lots of research and spend lots of time on anchors. The important part is what happens here. Plaintiff saved this one by getting off of the anchor in round 2, met with, we don't know what these concessions are in real dollars, but almost a linear path down to at least here on concessions, and which is probably doubling effect, whatever the number was from the defendants. So as crazy as it looks, and it's a more than 5x demand of what they ultimately settled for. Aside from all the noise, it was completely elegant. It's a linear path down to closing time, really, that both sides tit for tat, all the way down until one of them, defendant pulls back there and then takes a hard line, it looks like. But by then, plaintiff had saved enough face to get to there. And so then the question is, if things look like this, what can we do with it? Can we project where the offers are headed